Welcome to This is Concrete, a podcast where we speak with the people whose work revolves around concrete and coatings. Let's get to what you came for.
Hello, Chad Gill here. I'm the host of the This is Concrete podcast, where I talk with leaders in facilities management, architecture, contracting, and more. This episode is brought to you by Concrete. Concrete is a concrete polishing and coatings company with nearly 20 years of experience working in commercial, industrial, and residential markets. So whether you need smooth transitions for your warehouse traffic, a show-stopping lobby floor, or a seamless concrete accent wall, we can provide the skill and imagination you need to make your concrete uncommon. So what are you waiting for? Visit us at thisisconcrete.com to learn more about Concrete today. Joining me today on the show is Nick Savage, a longtime member of the PROSOCO team. He's been with them since 2010 and has worked as a concrete product specialist, a regional sales manager, as now a business unit leader with the Concrete Flooring Group. So Nick, thanks for coming on and talking to us about densifiers.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no kidding. Good to have you here. Kind of dive into the chemistry and the mystery of concrete densifiers. I mean, that's a near and dear product to us as concrete polishers. Can you kind of just start abruptly? What is a densifier, and what do we use it for?
Yeah. So densifiers are not necessarily a new phenomenon or new product. They've been around a while. Technologies, as with most things, have developed over the years. But densifiers are typically silicate products. Traditionally, they've been sodium, magnesium fluorosilicates, potassiums. In the past, I'd say 15 years or so, you've seen some developments with lithium silicate. And then lately, you've seen blended types of silicates. So essentially, what these densifiers do and why we use them, they're going to react. They're a liquid. They're going to penetrate. They're going to react. If you think of concrete as a sponge, and you got these little pores and these little gaps in there, what they do is that they're going to fill those pores. They're going to fill those gaps. And what they do is they react with a byproduct left over from the curing process, calcium hydroxide or free lime. And what they do is they turn that into what's called calcium silicate hydrate, which that product is essentially what makes concrete hard during the curing process. One of the most important benefits of it also is, if you can kind of see the background here of the warehouse, and typically in these warehouse functions, is that if you rub your hand across a bare concrete floor and you get a little chalkiness on it, that's the concrete dusting. So a densifier will help prevent that as well.
And how does it stop dusting?
It's through that reaction, right? So if there's no reaction, there's a lot of that free lime, a lot of that calcium hydroxide left over. And that's what's going to cause that concrete to dust. When we apply a densifier, whether that's, a lithium densifier or a sodium densifier, they're going to react with that byproduct to basically fill those gaps, fill those pores, and prevent that dusting from happening.
And we're not talking about pores like visible pores.
No. This is an internal. This is an internal type of seal, if you will.
And so when we do that, that's an interesting thing you talk about with the dusting, because you go in big warehouses and you see a lot of dust, and most people think, oh, that's coming off the product, or it's coming out of the ceiling and stuff like that. But a big portion of that is from the floor itself, giving off, much like you and I give off dead skin. Concrete gives off dust until you do a process like this, or it's sealed in one way or another.
Yeah.
So is it a sealer? And then what, because you kind of see it says densifier sealer on the bucket. Is it really a sealer, or is it just kind of?
Yeah, this is a question that we do get fairly often, because as you mentioned on the bucket, it does say hardener, sealer. And it's really more of that internal seal, like I mentioned, right? So, it is closing off pore structure. It is making a denser, more abrasion resistant surface. So liquids aren't going to have a chance to attack, acids aren't going to have a chance to attack as quickly. They still will, as we know, concrete's very, very reactive. So once something hits that surface, it's going to start reacting and attacking as soon as it can. A densifier is making a denser, more abrasion resistant surface that's also going to, help to prevent that. But as I mentioned before, with the interior seal, that's really where we at PROSOCO really kind of classify it as a sealer, where it's an interior seal. It's a lot to do with legacy type of languages and specifications as well. You can't really call a densifier a sealer in the traditional sense that most people think, right? It's not a film former. It will help, but it ultimately, some type of protective treatment is going to be typically recommended, especially if you're polishing concrete. Warehouses, you see a lot of just densifier and cure and seal type of applications, but it does have a sealing aspect to it, but it's not what people think of in the traditional sense.
So we start in like the early life of concrete. So we're going to pour, and then we have jobs where densifier is being applied the day of the pour, the day after the pour. Sometimes I've seen it used as the cure. Other times it's used prior to the cure. What is that scenario?
Yeah. So with this recent kind of wave of industry that we're in now, especially during COVID, you saw a ton of warehouses, distribution centers, and the e-commerce business is obviously not going anywhere. So we're seeing a lot of that. And with that industry, we saw much more of the densifier being applied before a cure was applied. We've done some testing and some research to find that you are still getting enough, of that byproduct over in order to react and to penetrate and to react within the concrete. But timing wise, it's always been a little debatable, right? Typically, when you look at ACI, you see 14 to 28 days, and that's where you get your optimal application time. But as you know, just as much as anybody, construction schedules are never the same, and they're constantly trying to push for faster and faster and faster. So in terms of schedules, we've seen densifier applied soon as they finish the concrete before the cure. What that does is it allows you to kind of speed up that process where you're not waiting for that cure to either dissipate if that's the product you go with, or removing the cure to densify. Or we've seen it, vice versa. So it really kind of depends on the application. If it's a full grind and polish, we're typically seeing that 14 to 28 day window. But it's all very dependent on the situation, right? Every job different, as you know. And so we're seeing it all over the board. And then to answer your question about the cure, this is also another one that has come up over the past couple of years as kind of a hot button question in terms of densifiers. And our stance on it is densifiers are absolutely a curing aid. They certainly help with the moisture retention. But in order to meet any type of ASTM test, whether that's C309 or 1315, they have to be a membrane forming product, which densifiers are not. So they can certainly help with the cure in terms of moisture retention. But to technically call them a cure, they are not meeting any real curing standards.
Dude, when you put a densifier that early, I know we're saying densifiers typically react with what's left over after a curing process has taken place in the concrete. Does densifying early rob that? I mean, is there a part of that calcium hydroxide that would have reacted naturally? Would it have been better to do that and then densify? Or is it just a matter of, hey, it doesn't matter how it gets there, it just needs to get there?
Yeah, no, I think that, if you can wait a little bit longer, I think you're going to get a better densification, because the concrete is always curing. Even after that 28-day mark, it's going to continue to cure. But I do think you have more of that calcium hydroxide at a certain point, whether that's the 2-week mark or the 28-day mark after the cure, to maybe get a little better densification out of it. But like I said, we did find that there's enough to prevent the dusting, which in these warehouses is the important thing. All the products and everything, you don't want that stuff on there. But I feel that you do get a little more beneficial densification out of it if you do wait a little bit. But the testing and research that we've done has seen enough. And with schedules, quite frankly, if they're happy with what we found, they want to keep that schedule moving.
Kind of a good, better, best type of scenario.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you're doing that, the densifier you would put down the day of, the day after, is it different than the densifier you would put down a month later?
Not typically, no. I mean, so we have a couple different versions. We've built our Consolidec line based on lithium densifiers. So we have two lithium densifiers, one called LS for lithium silicate, and one called LSCS, which is a lower solids version. And with that lower solids version, we found that it's got a little slower reaction time, which certainly helps on green concrete. So if you're going day of or day after, we're recommending LSCS in those applications. If you do come back at that 28-day point and you have bare open concrete, more often than not, we're going to see LSCS, but LS will work as well. And quite frankly, in those applications, from a competitive standpoint, pricing is certainly something that factors in. So the LSCS is at a little better price point per square foot. So we see LSCS in these applications more often than not.
So when you talk about percent solids, that's something that we understand in the coatings industry. It's like, okay, this much of it is water, this much of it is solvent, or those kind of things. When you're comparing different densifier brands, it's like, well, ours is, it's not like it's. I've never seen it on the bucket where it says this brand is this much percent solids and this one is this. I've heard more or less. But is that something that a contractor should be comparing? Like, is higher solids better?
Yeah, not always. Not always. It depends on the active solid content, right? I could have a product that's 99% solids and really 10% of them are active in that silicate solution. So it's not as big a deal with densifiers as it is with, in the coatings world, as you mentioned. So I think it's something to be aware of, but it's ultimately, most densifiers, ours included on the market, are very, very similar in terms of their active solid content. So it's really more in terms of, as the contractor on what you're going to use, it's more in terms of one, specification, two, preference, support, that kind of thing. So the solid content, it is important to a degree, but with densifiers, it's not as crucial as maybe a coating or, something to that effect.
So if you're densifying really early like this, and then you're going to polish later, is this a one and done? Will you need to densify again after you polish? I mean, how deeply is this going?
Yeah. So if you're going to densify early, and then come back and polish, we are going to recommend that you densify during that polish. You're opening up that slab. You're allowing it to breathe a little bit more. You're going to get a little more vapor transmission. So a densifier, it is going to be beneficial during that polishing process. So we certainly recommend it, even if you did an early application. Makes
sense. So there's different kinds. I guess the first ones that came out, sodium silicates, and they have some pros and cons associated with them. I would say the pros are, you get a fully saturated slab because you put all of it on there. Yeah. But that's where it stops. It's kind of like, okay, now you got to get it off there. Why is it that those are more susceptible to the staining and that kind of stuff? Yeah. So, and I preference this with all the presentations that I do, whether they're AIA presentations or product specifics. Densifiers, whether it's mine or anyone else's, when they're done correctly, they're going to work, right? So traditionally, sodium densifiers, magnesium fluorosilicate, and potassiums have been around a long time, right? Things like Ashford formula, right? Been around a long time. Good product. The difference is basically, as technology has grown and developed, it's really a way of how we want to go about it. So with a sodium, with a magnesium, they do take a little bit more time in terms of, they need a little bit of excess water. You need to, kind of scrub and flush and resaturate. And if you don't, like you mentioned, it can leave some deposits, leave some things behind that you're going to have to remove. With some of the newer technologies, such as lithium or some of these blended silicates,
it's really an application where you spray it down, you microfiber it in most times, and we try to get applicators to apply to rejection. A little easier to do with lithium and blended silicates, as you can control it a little bit more. But ultimately, you're going to spray, you're going to apply microfiber down and walk away, be ready to go, 20 minutes later or so. With some of the older technologies, takes a little bit more time. Like I said, they all work. They all do what they're intended to do when applied correctly. It's just some of the newer technologies are a little bit easier, a little bit faster. And to me, one of the big benefits of some of the newer technologies is we're not generating any wastewater, right? So with some of the older technologies, they do require a little bit more water, and that water becomes hazardous. You got to dispose of it properly. There are plenty of good options for disposal, slurry management type companies out there. But it's one more step that you have to do. It's one more thing you have to consider. With some of the newer products like lithium and these blended silicates, it's not something you have to do or to take into consideration. So, as the days of kind of emptying your scrubber outside into the street are no longer. And so that is something to certainly take into consideration.
You talk about apply to rejection. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you can apply, to rejection, basically meaning just that it's just not going to take anymore, right? If you put enough densifier down, it'll start to reject itself. It'll start to bead up on the surface. And that's how you ultimately know that you're getting that full densification of that concrete. That's not to say if you densify and you're not getting to that point that you're not applying enough, or you're not applying, you're not getting a good densification. But if you apply to rejection, for sure that you've got it all, and you've done the best that you can on that slab. As all slabs are different from pour to pour, from building to building, job to job. Every one of them is different. So, one day you may have a slab that you're going to use, 25 gallons on, and then the next day you're going to have the same square footage and you may use 15 gallons. So they're all going to be a little bit different in terms of what they're going to take, but it's really just that you're going to keep applying until the point where it just, starts to beat up, and you're not going to be able to get any more in.
Makes sense. So when you're coming through and you got, sodiums, and then more of the potassiums and magnesiums, then you get a blended, and then a colloidal sodium, I believe
colloidal silica. Yeah.
So you're just talking about the carrier at this point, right?
Yep. It's just the carrier. Like I said, colloidals are a little bit of more. They fall somewhere in between. Some of the newer and the older. They certainly have their advantages, and there's products out there that do quite well. But it's really preference at this point. Like I said, they all do what they're intended to do when they're applied correctly. We obviously believe that lithium is the way to go in terms of ease of application, time, labor savings, that kind of thing. But densifiers in general, like I said, they've been around a long time, right? And they haven't been around a long time because they don't work. So it's really a matter of, when you're choosing a densifier, you certainly are going to choose it based on one, specification, and two, your preference. What are your guys like? What do your team like to use? What kind of support are you going to get out of it? Most of the time, not always, but most of the time it's through distribution, right? What kind of support are you getting from a distributor, that kind of thing. And then availability has unfortunately been an issue with some companies over the past year. So there's a lot of factors in play.
Yeah, especially this time, this last year or so, sometimes the greatest ability of any product has been its availability.
Yeah, it was the past year taught us a lot in terms of, what we thought was a safety type of stock versus, where we are. We were fortunate to where we were not impacted much at all by any of that. So our team back in Lawrence, Kansas, where we're based, did a great job managing that. We were much more fortunate than some others. But yeah, unfortunately, it's a factor right now for some companies out there.
So does it matter whether you're polishing dry or wet? You said 20 minutes, like you put it out, you get to rejection, and then it's 20 minutes later. Does it matter? Does that time change whether you're wet, dry? I mean,
it's going to matter if, you're going to have a dry floor, right? We don't want to put it on a saturated floor. If it's a little bit wet, a little damp, it's okay. We would prefer a dry, clean floor. So if you're polishing wet, it's just a matter of how long it takes that floor to dry out.
And then how do you have to wait longer? Well, what grit do you recommend densifying it?
Yeah, so with our product, with the lithiums, we typically recommend anywhere between 200 to 400 grit. There's a couple factors in at play there. One, your concrete, right? So your concrete's going to tell you when you should apply. If in certain parts of the country, concrete's very, very soft, right? So you go down to Florida, concrete is super soft. So you're probably going to densify a little more often and early than you would on where I live in Chicago. Concrete tends to be a little more on the harder side. So the concrete's going to tell you, for one, when you're going to densify. And then two, from our standpoint, if you're going to do color, we're recommending that you do color first, then your densifier after. So again, that's going to depend on, when you put that down. Typically, we're going to recommend 400 grit for your color. So we'll do color at 400 grit and then densify right after that. So again, the data sheets, when you read data sheets, are recommendations. It's how we recommend you do it. But you and other people in the field are gonna find a system that works best for you. And that's one of the benefits of our product, is that it will kind of fall into what you want to do, what works for you. And most of the times we're okay with it. Sometimes we've heard some things that are like, no, I wouldn't recommend doing that. But more often than not, it'll fit into what you're trying to do. But we more often than not see around the 200 to 400 grit range.
And you mentioned it, yeah. I mean, we certainly densify. If we get to a floor and it's soft, it's almost a sacrifice where you're trading the densifier for diamond wear. You're like, I got to hard the floor up enough for it to grind, and we begin to polish. But our stance has always been, we need to do a densifier step at the 200 to 400 grit level, because I've always been shy about the idea that if I densify it after a 70 metal, that my next steps are probably going to cut through the area that got densified. And then I've also sat in presentations where they showed me the densifier going 6 inches into the slab.
Yeah,
I felt like that could only happen if there was a pipe in the slab. But
So I mean, the full depth or even a half depth penetration of the densifier, it is great. It's not really a factor in my opinion. It doesn't really do much. It's not a problem, but we really kind of focus on what historically we've called the wear zone, which is kind of the top 1/8 inch, which takes the brunt of the abuse on that slab. So you're right. If you densify at 70, you are going to remove a little bit, even though it's a penetrant and it's going to penetrate and react. There's no doubt some silicate that's going to get removed that early. But if you're on a very soft slab, it's still beneficial. You mentioned diamond tooling. My previous life worked with a company that sold diamond tooling, and I know the trials and tribulations of choosing tooling and burning a set of 70 metals up in 200 feet and how frustrating that can be. So I mean, there's certainly benefits of densifying early, but knowing your slab is huge. If we always recommend a mock-up whenever possible. That mock-up is going to tell you everything from your diamond tooling to when and how much densifier you're going to need and how your color is going to take, and all kinds of stuff like that. So it's critical that you have a mock-up on that slab, because it's going to tell you as a contractor everything you're going to need to know. And it's going to manage the expectations of the owner, right? They may have a vision that they're going to look at that they found on Google or they found on Pinterest or they saw at another store or something. And they may think that they're going to get exactly that, but that concrete's going to tell you exactly what you're going to get. So, the mock-ups are huge, not only in terms of product wise and you as a contractor being able to know what you're getting into, but it's going to manage those expectations and ultimately, hopefully, make that transition a little smoother.
Yeah, they're your saving grace. They're also language, completely, not relying on language. You're looking at an image that is right there in front of you, and you can all agree that you either yes, you like it or you do not.
Yeah.
It kind of gets a lot of that. The earlier, the better you can get that done. Yeah, we're big fans of the mock-up. Very important. I guess lastly, temperature. How does temperature affect it, and maybe even relative humidity?
Yeah. So most of these products, if not all densifiers, are water-based products. So, obviously the freezing point is going to be 32. Most data sheets out there, ours included, are going to give you a range between 40 and 100 degrees. If you get a little too hot, it starts to kind of almost flash off and dry before it has a chance to penetrate and react. They, even with some of the newer products that are faster, they still do need some time, right? So we want to keep that slab wet for 5 to 10 minutes, and to allow that to happen, to allow that reaction to happen. If it's too hot, they start to dry off, and you don't get a chance to do that. So typically we're seeing between 40 and 100. You want your relative humidity to be in that normal range, the 50, if you can get, the optimal humidity. Where we do see issues are if you're in a building and there is no HVAC or maybe it hasn't been turned on yet, and you apply products and you apply maybe even some film forming products and things like that, and then they flip that switch, and then all of a sudden you're pumping new air and humidity through there, and so you'll start to see some whiting and you'll start to see some sweating and things like that. So temperature control is certainly important. In terms of the temperature, anywhere between 40 and 100 degrees, surface temperature is typically what we want to see.
Yeah, that's and we've done things from making sure they had heat blankets to making sure we were doing it at night because too hotness in the sun.
Yeah,
which is to try and meet those schedules as well, like you mentioned. Schedule is driving factor of construction, it seems.
Yeah, for sure.
Time is money. Well, Nick, that's great, man. I mean, I don't know if there's anything else that I didn't get to or didn't ask you. It's densifier is a big part. I think it's the basis of what we do. We do run into the occasional contractor who says, that floor was so hard it doesn't need to be densified. Mm-hmm. I don't think that I agree with that. I've never run into one. I feel like it's just great. It's just best practice always.
Yeah, no, we agree, obviously. And, that's one of the big kind of, I don't want to call it a misconception, but, concrete, when I tell people that, we make products that we have products that make concrete, that's a densifier, it's a hardener. And they're like, well, isn't it pretty hard already? Well, yeah, for the most part, but it's more than making it a denser, harder, substrate. It has a little more benefits to it than that, right? Like we mentioned the dusting, and we mentioned, filling that pore structure and more abrasion resistant, things like that. So while it is ultimately making it a harder substrate, there are more benefits to it. And in my 12 years at PROSOCO and 6 years before that, when I first started in the industry in 2003, densifiers were there and starting to get used for polishing. Not everybody did at the time, but it started to. And now you're very hard pressed to find a contractor who doesn't densify when they're polishing concrete.
Yeah, and you're hard pressed to find an exposed floor that isn't calling for it.
Exactly. Exactly. And especially in the world today where, restoration is such a huge part of our industry. Adaptive reuses of buildings are a very trendy and necessary thing right now. So taking old buildings and converting them into new spaces. Here in Chicago, over the past 2 years, we went through a renovation of a massive building. It was the old main post office downtown. They converted it into 11 floors of different office spaces of some pretty well-known companies like Pepsi and Walgreens and Uber Freight, and names that you would know. And those are all finished concrete floors that all have a densifier applied to them, and and other treatments as well. So we've certainly seen that over the past couple of years, to where new construction certainly out there, but we're seeing more and more restoration of slabs, and densifiers are used on every single one of those.
And it's worth mentioning. I mean, there's you do need the concrete to be cured, or at least hard enough to walk on. But any age concrete can benefit from densifier as well.
Absolutely, because you're taking whatever was there before, you're opening up that concrete. That first pass or so with your grinder is opening up that concrete, and it's like starting to breathe for the first time in 80 years or however long it's been. And you're going to start to see some things happen, but a densifier is going to certainly help. It's just going to help your process moving forward, right? So, and what you're getting there as well. So the benefits of densifiers, whether it's new or existing substrates, are definitely there.
Fantastic. Well, Nick, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on and kind of giving us a rundown on densifiers. I feel like I've got a solid education on it now.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I love your podcast. I think it's a great idea, and I'm certainly happy to be on it.
Absolutely. We may be coming back to you when we try to get into this whole guard and penetrating sealer discussions here soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to.
That's always an interesting one.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Thanks so much, Nick.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, take it easy.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to This is Concrete. We look forward to you joining us next time. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.